I analysed 84 games from the FNCS champions of every region, and just under 5% of these were 0-point matches. That means that in only 4 of the 84 matches, these players died in their drop spot, showing that it's almost a requirement to have a good landing spot mastered. So how do you choose where to land? Well, the removal of cars from competitive means that rotating from one edge of the map to the other is significantly less feasible, so naturally POIs in the middle of the map have a higher success rate. It's not surprising that 3 of the 7 regions winners landed at the Collider, a mid-map POI. All of these players understood and had mastered the drop, but most importantly of all, knew how to be the first one to touch the ground. Cruel and Asta from Middle East use the air vent in the middle of the Collider to ensure they get the lowest drop possible, as this resets the height that they can glide from. On EU, Vino and Accra use the exact same strategy on the blimp at Command Cavern to drop down to the west side, beating anyone who would be stupid enough to glide down normally. As soon as their feet touch the ground, they both instantly push to the slurp truck to get max shield. Cruel then utilizes the cannon to fire himself into the Collider, which propels him down towards the Cami split to grab additional loot. This saved around 60 seconds of walking, meaning that he could grab this additional loot before anyone else around him could. Having the best drop and an efficient looting path is an absolute requirement, but that means nothing if you don't rotate at the right times. Brazil's champions KBR and Zeet drop at Rocky Reels, another mid-map position, and to loot this entire POI and get max metal only takes them 3 minutes, meaning they manage to leave 1 minute before the first zone even starts to shrink. On rotate, they ensure to have the route planned out to get max wood and brick, then are in a position looking for damage 1.5 minutes later. They take a split on this hill to ensure KBR has full visibility on the south side and Zeet has full visibility north. Since they're here so early, they have 6 minutes to sit here and get as much Storm Surge damage as possible, where most teams in this lobby have around 4 minutes. The results of this are clear, since it wasn't uncommon for them to be over 300 damage above the threshold, in this game doing 579 damage by the time the first warning appeared. Now, rotation timing is really important, but if you don't know the correct positions to rotate to, you'll just look like a lost flopper. Pretty much regardless of where the zones land, there will always be players rotating through the center of the map, and this is easily exploitable. Peterbot and Byla, the NA East champions, often position themselves pretty much straight on their drop spot, as this high vantage point gives them tons of visibility over players rotating through the loot lake, as well as players trying to use the mobility in the Collider. Small hill to the east of Tilted Towers gives you the almost unlimited visibility on the entire north, east and south directions. This spot has a ton of utility and players nearly always will rotate through the mid-map, and since the terrain is relatively flat, the players moving through here are easy damage. We saw a ton of our champions such as Middle East Asta and Cruel, who dropped at the Collider like we said earlier, claim this spot as early as they possibly could, often with one player rotating there early whilst the other one caps off his materials. This spot becomes even more powerful when you combine it with the Mythic Burst AR, since this drops just south of the Collider. Peterbot and Byla found that by standing on this right hand peak, the AI won't even aggress you, meaning that you don't have to take any damage and waste your heals trying to get this mythic. It's no surprise that both these spots also have cannons that can be used to rotate when they need to move. However, not understanding the paths you should take to the further zones is a common issue that basically every level of player does. NA West, Snacky and Favs were only the bottom 25 in placement in 1 of the 12 games, showing they made minimal mistakes on their rotational paths and mid-game. It's pretty common knowledge that if you get to the center of the zone, you have the highest chances of pulling the next zone. However, this isn't feasible in every zone of every match, so there are some crucial efficiencies you can make. In Game 4, a game in which they won, Snack and Favs were rotating to a south zone since they already had Storm Surge damage. They get sprayed and held by a team behind them and commit some materials to get themselves deeper into the second zone. Now, this micro rotation is potentially what actually won them this game. Over the next 2 minutes, players continue to rotate into the zone behind them, and since this is a south zone, the north side will become congested with all the teams rotating late. Because Snacky and Favs had decided to go a little bit deeper into zone and not just position themselves on the edge, they were ahead of all of these players that rotated in late. Had they positioned themselves at the edge, all of these teams would have had an angle to get tags and spray them, draining their materials and HP for the next rotate. It's no surprise that they made the rotate to the third zone unscathed, but also did the exact same thing in this zone. positioning themselves away from the edge as much as possible and getting as close to the center as they could. Your mid-game positioning is crucial in ensuring you don't lose any materials on rotate, but if you don't have a launch pad, you're going to waste a ton more materials in the endgame. OCE winners Volks and Looter took every opportunity they could to grab a supply drop, given they provide a guaranteed launch pad. They used probably 20 builds to rotate to the supply drop, however the launch pad they get from this will probably save them around 50 to 100 in the first moving zone, so definitely a worthy sacrifice. However, the difference is, for some reason they didn't get a launch pad from this drop, meaning they had to tarp for the start of the endgame. Luckily, Volks and Looter have the art of tarping down to a T and always manage to find a free lair. Whenever Looter finds a team in his lair, his first instinct is to build in front of them and to cut them off in an attempt to force them to change lairs. This wasn't successful and Looter received a large chunk of damage in return, meaning that they instead dropped a lair down. This lair was completely free, meaning that they could tarp without running into another team. This is only possible because they already started the moving zones on a high lair. If they'd started on a relatively low lair, chances are they're just going to run into more players down there. However, if you time your lair change correctly, you can use this to almost guarantee yourself low ground. In order to do this, we must understand how to find the dead side on moving rotations. Say the zone is pulling to the east. The majority of the players will be on the far west hand side of the zone when it gets to this zone transition. So for example, if the next zone pulls to the north, the dead side will be on that full east side. So when this next zone starts to pull to the north, if you're fast enough on this zone transition, you can jump in front of everyone else and claim the low ground. Now this is exactly what Asia winners Clip and Runa did twice in this exact same game. On the 8th zone transition, they did this here to claim low ground, then fragged out and got a bunch of eliminations on the low ground. So that zone was pulling north, then the next one is going to pull to the west. So if you followed along, you'll understand that the full north side will become the dead side here. So since they're already on low, they can just wrap all the way to the north and then start moving west from there to ensure they stay away from every other player. Scented fan in the name clearly coming through, as this is how Scented has played low ground for many seasons. However, it's very difficult to win games from low ground, so there's a couple specific things that you can do to try and increase your chances. Brazil's Zeet in this clip ends up splitting all of the remaining chug splashes to KBR, since he also has 4 floppers and they know they're down to low materials, meaning that KBR could then make a play for heal off. Now, will he win the game with this? Potentially not. However, he will get a couple additional placements by spending the time in zone healing off. If you add these additional placements throughout multiple games, this adds up a lot on the overall leaderboards. Somehow in this game, miraculously, KBR actually ends up winning, and this victory royale wins them the entire tournament. Of course, if you don't have the mechanical capabilities to clutch up in crucial moments, then you'll never win games. Notice, despite the fact this is a 2v1 situation, he doesn't choke this by just running into the opponent's face. He ends up doing a beautiful peanut bar edit, coning the opponent, and then managing to reset this. His realization the opponent has no materials is great as well, so he actually jumps into the backside of zone, tanks a little bit of zone damage because the opponent doesn't understand that he's there, which allows him to pick up a big shot and eventually win this match. Now this was a clutch to win from low ground, but you must have the ability to play high ground in your arsenal to be able to consistently win games. Who better to use as an example of high ground than EU Zone, Aqua and Vino. Notice how in this clip Aqua and Vino have roughly 100 builds each and no launch pad in the 5th zone. So at this point they're always looking for opportunities, and luckily Aqua finds one and picks up an easy knock. This is when both him and Vino become extremely aggressive, get that finish, cap up their materials, and yes, get a launch pad as well. This was the first step to taking height, because this refresh that they got is a catalyst for their victory royale in this game. Notice how they use the additional materials they get to actually tunnel a little bit of the way into the first moving zone. These materials were all left over and additional, and this gives them a little bit of extra time before they need to use that launch pad. This means that whilst other players are up in the air, Aqua and Vino can just open an edit at the front side of their tarp and just get some easy storm surge damage and potential knocks out of the sky. By the time that they use their launch pad, most of the other teams have already landed at this point. However, they continue to double dip and even triple dip their launch pad, hitting it 3 different times. The small amount of white HP they sacrificed here was definitely worth it, because they've essentially just used almost no materials and 1 launch pad to get through the entire of the first moving zone. The fact now that they're in the air for so long and they're landing so late is the secret to their height retake. What they do is they land split and both crank up at separate angles. However, because Aqua and Vino landed so late, Hen was completely unaware of the fact that Aqua was there, giving Aqua and Vino the high ground. Now most players are going to use their second launch pad as soon as that second moving zone starts, and this is why Aqua ends up doing the split high ground hold at this moment, to ensure that they do not get launch padded on. But notice as soon as those launch pads have been used, Aqua ends up dropping down to Vino and they stick together and just stay on a single layer for the rest of the moving zones. They drop down for materials when they need to ensure they keep ammo and end up winning the game. Subscribe.